Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Daniel Mortimer, or Dan. I am one of the current organizers and one of the leaders at the camp of the International Astronomical Youth Camp, or IAYC. And as Andrew says, I'm going to be giving you a sort of rundown of everything we've been doing over the last 50 years, as well as a bit more sort of, so these are the topics I want to cover tonight, starting off with what the IAYC is, and then why do we run astronomy camps in the first place, followed by a little bit about where we are currently as a camp and where we're going in the future. And then, of course, as Andrew said, having a in-person camp of 65 people from around the world coming together into one house is kind of unthinkable at the minute. So we've had to make some changes to what we usually do for the last couple of years. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been up to. And then finally, I'll tell you a bit about how you can get involved in what we're doing now and in the future. So what is the IAYC? A good place to start. Again, as Andrew said, first camp stretches all the way back to 1969 in West Germany. Since then, we have had 53 camps in total. There were years, I can't remember which decade it was now, where we had more than one camp a year. However, those have been spread over 15 countries, and we've had total participants at the camps of around 3,000 at this point. I think these numbers need a little bit of updating, but it definitely gives you sort of order of magnitude values, with about over 1,500 of those participants being different people. And they cover 77 different countries. So I think we quite earned the I in our International Astronomical Youth Camp name. So the camp duration itself is 3 weeks long. So it's extended quite a bit over the years. And each camp typically features around 65 participants aged between 16 and 24 years old. So as we saw, we have quite a history at the IAYC, stretching all the way back to actual camping and tents in the 60s. And we've changed a little bit since then. But some things haven't changed too much. So we are organized every summer by a team of volunteers who are comprised completely of former participants. And the camp itself is actually ran by the not-for-profit German Verein, or just a club called the International Workshop for Astronomy, which I'm also a part of. So the leaders at the camp are also members of IAYC. And we put on the camp every year for 3 weeks at cost, because obviously we're a not-for-profit. So the current participation fee is around 870 euros. And that's for the full 3 weeks of the camp, including the accommodation, all the meals, and the whole program. So we do try our best to keep that as low as possible. So the previous camp houses, as I said, we've been to quite a few countries over the years. So each year we typically go to a different house. So what we do is we typically rent an entire youth hostel in a dark sky site, and we move around different youth hostels year to year. So this is a figure here. Each star represents where the camp houses have been in the past. And the color scale here you can see is how many times that country has hosted the IAYC. A number of countries have hosted the IAYC more than once in the past. And as you can see, we're mainly focused around Europe, with our last camp outside of Europe being in 1984. And since 2012, we've been between Austria, Germany, Spain, and the United Kingdom. So you can see the camp down here at a lovely old manor house called Nettlecombe Court in dark, I believe that's a dark sky reserve. There's some wonderful views that you get out there, and it's a really nice place. But yeah, so that's typically where the IAYC is. But where do the participants who come to the camp come from? As I said, they come from all around the world. And here is a map with a color bar of the number of participants from for different countries. And again, you can see we have a significant number of Germans, Spaniards, and British people attending the camp. And the rest of our participants are mainly European. However, we do have a number of participants coming from around the world. In particular, America seems to be the favorite place other than Europe. But throughout the camp's history, we have had participants from the vast majority of countries. And you can see here in red, this is the number of nationalities represented at each camp. So this has slowly been ticking up over the years. And nowadays we have around 20 different nationalities represented at every camp, which is really nice. So what does a day in the life of the IAYC look like? It's a bit different to normal people's schedules. So we wake up at midday for breakfast. And this is always one thing when we're trying to book a house, is explaining to them our meal schedule can create some problems sometimes, but it is always worth asking. So we start with breakfast around midday, and this is followed by the first working group at 1 p.m. And I'll be telling you a bit more about what all these activities are as we go through the talk. So we start with first working group at 1, followed by lunch at around 5:30, and then nap, NAP or nap time at around 7:30. Again, I'll explain that in a little bit. Followed by the second working group, dinner, and then typically observing after midnight until people decide they want to go to bed, and then midday the next day, we start it all again. So if I go a little bit more into this now, working groups that I mentioned, these are where we do the sort of main science at the camp. So each working group has one leader and around 8 participants. So when you look at the first info online, which is the sort of description of the upcoming camp, you'll see 8 different working groups detailed with each leader running the group and a little bio, followed by a description of the working group. And each working group runs under sort of a general theme. So we've had everything over the last number of years that we've been running, from astrophotography working groups to exoplanet science, science communication, theory groups to coding groups. And then within each of these general sort of umbrella themes of each group, we typically run 4 projects where the participants go off in pairs of 2 to do 1 project each. And they will work on that project sort of independently for 3 weeks during the camp under the supervision of the leader, in sort of a PhD supervisor, PhD student sort of fashion. So it's really up to the student to take the project and develop it themselves. And one thing that is kind of interesting is that we actually only run sort of official working group time, where the participants are expected to work on these projects, only lasts for 4.5 hours a day. So we like to keep that short. You can work on this outside of the regular working group times, your project, but we really encourage the participants to go out and socialize and talk to each other and enjoy the dark skies and make the most of the telescopes and equipment that we have on site. However, at the end of the camp, they take the reports that they've been working on, and each pair of participants writes an 8-page report in LaTeX about their project. So this sort of semi-coding typeface tool used by most scientific journals to write scientific papers. And then these reports are compiled into a book, which we publish. Well, we don't publish it publicly, but we print and we send to all the former participants. So it's a really nice sort of memento that you get at the end of the camp, to where you can go and look at what everyone else was working on, and a nice little reminder of the things that we got up to during the camp. So the other thing on the schedule is the non-astronomical program, or nap time. And this is essentially anything but sort of astronomy. So this is really to encourage you to get socializing and get you moving, get you outside of the house. We also have various other events such as National Evening and Singing Evening, which I'll tell you a bit more about later actually. But it's just a bunch of often sort of silly games to get you moving and get talking to everyone else. So as I mentioned, we also do quite a bit of observing, of course, and we have a variety of telescopes. You can see here one of the other leaders posing with a few of the telescopes that we had, when we were setting up one year. So we have telescopes ranging all the way from sort of a 80mm Williams Optics refractor to here a personal solar telescope for looking at the sun in hydrogen alpha, to a 12-inch collapsible Dobsonian. And you can also see a bunch of different telescopes. We have a sort of a small Newtonian reflector here, or a big Cassegrain, which I think has been with us for decades at this point. But one thing we do stress is that we don't expect participants to have any prior experience of observing. We really do encourage everyone to get involved in it. So if you come to the camp and you've never observed before, then we will give you all the training you need to be able to use any of the telescopes. And but if you do have a lot of experience observing, then you're welcome to take a telescope out and go and observe whatever you want. And as I said, we select the campsites particularly for their dark skies. So we're talking places where you're always able to see the Milky Way when it's clear, of course. So you do get some truly wonderful views, both with the naked eye and with the variety of telescopes we have available. So who can attend the camp? Anyone between 16 to 24 years old with an interest in science. So this is something, again, that's really sort of fundamental to the camp experience, is that we do not select people based on academic merit. So we don't ask for anything sort of transcripts or lists of classes that they're taking. The selection is made entirely by a short motivation letter, which the participants write on why they want to attend the camp. So they write a short letter, maybe a page, about what they think they're going to get from the camp, why they want to attend, and the selection process is based entirely off of that. So that's who we are and what we do. But now what I'm going to try and do is convince you why it's important that we run camps like this. So you can kind of split this argument I'm going to take into two kind of sections. The first one is what do participants get out of camp? The first sort of section is more tangible sort of academic skills, so such as independent research skills. As I said, taking charge of their own small research project, developing it, figuring out how to be efficient, what works, what doesn't work, as well as directly learning practical tools for research, such as I mentioned, writing reports in LaTeX, or a lot of projects often involve programming in Python. So student participants often come away with a lot of programming skills. However, there's a second sort of I would almost argue larger aspect or benefit to running summer camps like this, which is the more intangible sort of things that they take away, such as the cultural exchange of living with 20 other people, 60 odd people with from 20 different nationalities for 3 weeks. We found has a huge positive impact on our participants, as well as taking away things such as the confidence that science is for sort of people like them, that they can do science and astronomy and physics as a subject at university or even as a career, which is something I'll talk a bit about, as well as making lifelong friendships. And so these are my arguments as to why we should continue running summer camps. And now, like a good scientist, I'm going to back up these claims with some evidence. So we ran an article in 2019 in Nature Astronomy, written by two of our leaders, Hannah and Josh, on assessing the influence of one astronomy camp over 50 years. And you'll recognize this figure from the start of the talk. This is where I've stolen a number of my figures from. So this article was based on a survey completed by 307 former participants. So quite a wide pool of participants, pooling them on their experience at the camp and what they took away from it. So before we sort of dive into the survey, a little bit about who answered the survey. You can see here, this is the answer to the years that the respondents to the survey attended the camp. So you can see we do have responses all the way back from 69, stretching throughout most of the IAYC history, and of course peaking in the recent years, for which we're most in touch with a lot of our former participants. And interestingly here, you can see the number of respondents and the number of camps they attended. So you can see that we do have a significant portion of our participants attending more than one camp, which already sort of gives us a sign that we're doing something right, that they keep coming back for more camps. So as I said, the first side to it is research skills. This is one thing that the participants get out of it. The working group leader gives them the outline of projects, but then it's up to them to take it away and develop them. And some sort of former projects that we've had over the years involve building a spectroscope, characterizing exoplanets from light curve data from professional observatories. One year, we also attempted to build a radio telescope on site, as well as typically there's always someone working on astrophotography. So learning everything from planetary photography to deep sky photography, carrying out numerical simulations of galaxies or the sort of kinematics of stars in the local solar neighborhood, as well as observing and measuring at the camp itself photometric light curves of eclipsing binaries to try and see if we can see that dip at the camp. And this is something that I'm going to do is pepper throughout these slides a number of quotes that came out of the survey. So one here says, "The camp helped me think critically and independently. It helped me understand science better. I learned how to start a project, follow it through, and write up a presentation on it," which is a huge aim of these projects that we run. And how does this translate after the camp? Well, so we have, looking through the archive of astronomy papers, we find around 4,500 refereed scientific papers published by former participants, 10 of which are first author papers in Nature, 45 co-authored papers in Nature. Of course, this was probably a nod, seeing as the paper was published in Nature Astronomy. And we do lay claim to some famous astronomers and science communicators, such as Robert McNaught, who discovered many comets and minor planets, as well as a discoverer of one of the moons of Uranus, and a Dutch popular science writer. But of course, we can't claim all this success that they went on to have in later life is entirely due to the IAYC, although we would like to, but that's just something to bear in mind. So that's one aspect with the research skills. But then I want to sort of move on to the more sort of intangible side of things. And one of them is the cultural exchange that participants receive from being at the camp. So as I said, you're essentially spending 3 weeks living with people from around 20 different countries from around the world. And we find that this has a large impact on sharing a lot of late night, both of the structured events and also hanging out with people from all around the world on the observing field late at night, staring up at the Milky Way is quite an experience. So for example, one of the structured events we have is the national evening, where every country that's represented is invited to give a sort of short 5-10 minute presentation about their country or their culture. And it often does involve food, which people bring from all around the world in their suitcases. So that's always a highlight of the camp program. And there's a couple more quotes here. "For me, the international gender balance character of the camp was a real eye-opener. It made me look beyond my narrow 18-year-old horizons. The world opened up for me. This feeling of being a global citizen capable of becoming a scientist came straight from the IAYC. And the IAYC opened a whole new world of friends, travel experiences. It made me a much more international person and in some way allowed me to be more confident." And of course, one of the big benefits of the camp is then you know people from all around the world, so you always have a sort of sofa or a place to stay at when you're traveling, which I found is a great benefit over the years. And this is another topic that I think is worth highlighting, is getting across this message to people, particularly those who may not come from a sort of academic background, that science is for people like you. So from the survey, we had 145 respondents, or 47%, said the IAYC influenced their career choice in some way, which I kind of think is quite a staggering number. We're talking about a 3-week summer camp, and nearly half the people that went said the camp had an impact on their career choice. And 29 said they chose explicitly to study astrophysics or continue studying astrophysics because of the IAYC. So of our former participants, of those between 25 and 65, almost half of them have a PhD. I had to actually double check these numbers. I didn't quite believe them myself. 37% have a master's degree and 14% have a bachelor's degree. And this is compared to 32% of adults in the EU achieving some form of tertiary education, so such as a bachelor's degree at university. Again, we can't claim this is all due to the IAYC alone. It's particularly important to note that 77% of respondents said they had parents educated to at least a bachelor's level as a caveat. So when you compare that to the sort of EU average, you can see that our participants are typically coming from a probably more academically focused backgrounds, where they may have been more likely to go on and do a degree anyway. But looking at the numbers before, it's clear that the IAYC does have an impact. And then as a caveat to that caveat, is worth saying that only 100 respondents out of the 300 answered this question about their parents' education level. So there is a sort of asterisk on this number, but it does suggest that we can't claim this is obviously entirely due to the camp. But a couple more quotes. The IAYC showed me it was possible to pursue a career in astronomy and astrophysics and make a career of it. I didn't realize I could do this very specific area of physics with my life. A career in astronomy and astrophysics seemed possible after my first camp. And my trip to the IAYC, sponsored by the National Scientific Organization, confirmed and inspired my love for astrophysics, making me determined to pursue a career. I subsequently completed an undergraduate degree, master's and a PhD in mathematics with a specialty in general relativity. Excuse me. So I think those are two sort of really great outcomes of the camp. And there is another one I'd like to talk about, which is my personal history, if you'll indulge me for a few slides. So I first attended the camp in 2012 as a participant. And I actually was given this leaflet from the Leeds Astronomical Society. Hang on, sorry. Yeah, so I was given this leaflet when attending the Leeds Astronomical Society, and I actually threw this leaflet away the first time I received it because I thought attending an astronomy summer camp is just not for people like me. The people I knew from my background just typically didn't go to astronomy summer camps. And so I actually threw this leaflet away. And it wasn't until I attended the Leeds Astronomical Society the following week that someone else gave me this leaflet again. And at that point I thought, all right, I really ought to check out what this is about. So I went onto their website, I read some of the stories of former participants, and the more I read, the more I just knew that I had to go to this camp. And so I sent in my application, and well, the rest is kind of history. And I don't think it's an understatement to say that attending the IAYC gave me the confidence that I could do a degree in physics. And since then, well, as I say, the rest is history. I first attended the camp in 2012. In 2015, I joined the leader team, helping to organize and run the camp. And while this was going on in 2017, I graduated from the University of Leeds with a master's degree in physics with astrophysics. And then following this, I started my PhD at the University of Cambridge, which I'm due to finish this year. Hopefully, just need to write the thesis. And my day job now is building instruments for world-class observatories. So this is kind of my, well, I feel like baby is not quite the right word, but my project has been designing building, testing, and now getting towards commissioning this instrument for this observatory down here, which is called the Magdalena Ridge Observatory Interferometer. So, seeing as you're all astronomers, I hope you'll indulge me for a couple of slides while I tell you a little bit about what it is I do, because, well, I just think it's quite cool. So I work in optical interferometry, which is a technique of combining the light from separate telescopes in the optical to simulate the resolution of a much larger telescope. So we routinely do observations in the field which give you the resolution as if you had a 300-meter optical telescope. So all this ELT stuff where they're talking about their great 40-meter telescope is nothing compared to the resolution we can obtain. But this is a sort of very rough schematic of how it works. So you have your star up here, and you'll have your two telescopes separated by a baseline B. And unlike in the radio, you might have seen the Event Horizon Telescope, where they have their telescopes spread around the world, and they simulate the resolution of a telescope the size of the Earth. We would love to do that, but unfortunately, that's a bit impractical in the optical, because we actually have to physically combine the starlight from the separate telescopes onto one detector. So here we have a bunch of relay optics, which carry the light from each telescope. Then we have the delay lines here, which, interestingly enough, we have to actually compensate for the difference in path length from the star to the two separate telescopes, because one of these telescopes is actually closer to the star than the other telescope. And we have to correct for that to typically within a micron to bring the two bits of starlight, which have traveled exactly the same distance, onto a detector, which then produce interference fringes, so like the Young's double slit experiment, if you might be familiar with that. And then we can take those interference fringes and use them to gain information of the night sky as if we had a telescope the size of the separation of these two telescopes. And with that, you can do some truly amazing stuff. So these are not sort of computer generated images. These are genuine images of the stellar disk of other stars, which you can actually resolve with these interferometers. And you can see here we have a bunch of very fast rotators, and these are rotating so fast they sort of squish themselves into more of a pumpkin shape, sort of a bit like Jupiter does as well, but on a much more extreme scale. And obviously these are quite a number of stars that you might be familiar with as an amateur astronomer, such as Regulus and Altair, some of the brighter stars which are easier for us to image. And as I said, my PhD and what I work on these days is building a new instrument for one of these telescopes, the Magdalena Ridge Observatory Interferometer. So I'm essentially building the back-end imaging instrument, which actually brings the two beams of starlight and produces the interference fringes. So this is actual lab data that I took a few months back of the interference fringes generated with an artificial light source in the lab in Cambridge. Yeah, so that is what I do now, and obviously is kind of a dream job, and is entirely, well, a very large part due to my attendance to the camp and getting the feeling that I can go on to do something like this, to be a scientist. But of course, it's not just about that. There's also the lifelong friends aspect. So we have some more stats. Around 54% of respondents said they have attended reunions. So these are gatherings that we have sort of after the camp. They're not organized by our organization. They're just former participants get together and say that we want to, meet up again. And in particular, 75% of participants say they're still in contact with other participants on at least a monthly basis, which suggests these are not just people you meet during the camp once. And 7.8% of former participants are now married or in a partnership, which again is one stat close to my heart, because the camp is also where I met my partner. And we've been together for a number of years now. And a fun little addition to that is that 3.3% now have children together. So we have what we like to dub the IAYC babies, sort of next generation participants, which sort of have application forms ready to go as soon as they're 16 years old, we've been told. So that's kind of why we, I feel like we should continue, well, why we run astronomy camps like that, and why us as volunteers come back every year to run this camp, because it has typically had a large impact on our lives, and we want to give back to the former participants. We want to give back to new participants to give them the opportunity to come to the camp and have that experience. So I want to change gears a bit and talk a bit about where we are now and in the context of where we want to go in the future. So in particular, gender balance is one thing that we've looked at. And the percentage of female participants at the camp has, we're very happy to say, increased year on year, reaching sort of 50% around 2012. And it's actually continued to rise since then. So it is slightly more female than male participants these days. And we also recently had our first non-binary participants attending the camp in the most recent years. We've also been trying to have a bit of an LGBT plus focus. So in 2017, leaders started to introduce themselves with pronouns. We also run a sort of small IAYC Pride Parade, which a number of participants choose to attend during the camp. And in 2019, we added an option to say other on the application form for the gender, as well as offering the option of mixed gender dorm rooms for those who would prefer that option. In terms of diversity, this is something that we are aware of and would like to do more in the future. So you can see this is in response to the survey, not the raw participants themselves, but you can see this is a very large white demographic that has attended the camp in the past. In particular, worth highlighting is that there wasn't a single respondent who said they were Black. And this is a high priority for us going forward, something we'd really like to tackle. And so, as I said in the earlier parts of the talk, we're mainly a European-based organization, which kind of gives two major roadblocks to improving here and expanding. One is that a large fraction of our advertising is done by word of mouth. So you have one participant come and then they go home, and then the following year they put up posters in their local physics departments. They tell their European friends. So we typically have more of the same Europeans advertising to their European social circles. And there's the additional fact that, as I said, the camp has been hosted in Europe every year since 1985. And this can make the cost of travel for those living outside of Europe to be just prohibitive, especially for people from lower sort of socioeconomic countries, particularly if you put on the cost of the participation fee of the camp itself on top of that. So two ways we're trying to tackle this is for the advertising by word of mouth. We'd like to make a more explicit effort to advertise in underrepresented countries. So making the most of any connections we have there currently, or forging new connections, as well as extending the grant program to help fund participants' attendance to the camp who couldn't otherwise. So the grant program is something we've been running for a number of years, and this is where we aim to reduce or even waive the vast majority of the participation fee. That's still to say that the travel costs themselves and participants still have to fund that. However, this can be a significant reduction and make the camp much more accessible. But of course, like the vast majority of generous charitable programs were chronically underfunded for the grant program compared to the amount requested. So you can see the amount we've been able to allocate over the years in thousands of euros here has been going up, but it seems so has the total amount of money requested. So it is a factor that we have the participants from places that they couldn't afford to come to the camp otherwise. They are applying in some numbers, but it's just a matter of that we can't afford to help them. But of course, we'd like to increase the number of participants applying as well. So as I said, then another thing that we're aware of and would like to tackle in the future is academic background. So as I mentioned before, 77% of our respondents said their parents were educated to at least a bachelor's level. But we would like to reach more people who may not have had academic opportunities sort of in the past or growing up. The sort of sciences for people like you, people, and obviously, as I say, this is something quite close to my heart. So that's kind of where we are and where we're going. But there are some positives that I'd like to, share to take away from this section. Is these wonderful numbers, but 97% think that the camp is beneficial. 96% said that it had a positive influence on their life. Working with participants of different ages was beneficial. 99% said working with participants of different academic backgrounds was beneficial. 100% said working with participants from international backgrounds was beneficial. And as I said before, 3/4 of our participants are in regular contact with other IAYCers after the camp. So that's kind of where we are and where we'd like to go in the future. But change gears a little bit again, and I'll tell you a bit about how we've been handling the COVID-19 pandemic. So as I said, the idea of hosting a in-person camp with 65 people from all around the world flying in to live in a house together is kind of unimaginable at the minute, unfortunately. So in 2020, sadly, but unsurprisingly, we had to take the decision to cancel the in-person camp for the first time in the IAYC's history. And of course, this year, 2021, we are making great progress, but we're still not at the stage that we can confidently say we can safely host a camp. So we've also had to cancel this year's in-person edition of the IAYC. And we are very fortunate that as an organization, we have very minimal running costs. So as I said, we kind of rent a youth hostel every year. So if we don't have a camp, we don't have to pay for a youth hostel. And all the people who work in this organization work entirely on a voluntary basis. So we don't have anyone's wages to pay, for example. So we're very fortunate in that sense that we are able to keep going. But obviously we're not able to do our core activity, as it were. However, we have been able to push ahead with something. So we rebranded ourselves for the 2020 camp as the IAYC with this lovely redesigned logo. I think one feature that I want to point out, which I'm not sure many people have noticed before, is the actual sort of biohazard marker on the planet Earth here, which I thought was quite a nice little touch to the logo. So we ran the IAYC last year between June and August 2020 with a variety of events, mainly with the aim of keeping former participants engaged with the IAYC and getting them, to give them the opportunity to spend time with each other again, as we would at a real camp. However, we quickly learned, but of course, it's no substitute for the real thing. So we ran a series of activities such as ENAP, so similar to our non-astronomical program during the camp. We hosted a variety of quiz nights, team challenges, and remote workshops. I think one of the remote workshops was a Highland dancing workshop. I would be interested to see how well that went on Zoom. But one of the challenges, for example, was do the most impressive thing you can with an A4 sheet of paper. And these were a couple of the entries that we received. So this one is some kind of small elephant, which I think is quite impressive that you could make that out of one single sheet of paper. And I'm not quite sure, I think these are small dragons trying to colonize Mars, I believe. But it was just a sort of, to get everyone together, spending time and just having a bit of fun while we were all stuck in lockdown. One of the other activities we also ran was called the Engagement Series. And so this was a series of short astronomy, typically astronomy themed workshop run over a weekend. So one example, and of course I bring up this example because this is the one I did, was to build a telescope simulator. So here you can see this is the simulator in action. You can see here on the left a lovely sort of Hubble picture of Jupiter, very crisp, and you can see this horribly blurred and shaking view of Jupiter. And this is the output of the simulation of Jupiter subject to sort of atmospheric seeing perturbations for a 8-inch reflector with a 1.2 meter focal length and a 3 times Barlow lens. And I know this exactly because this is my sort of telescope that I have at home myself. So it's great to sort of put it through a simulator and compare it to actual observations. So as I said, this was sort of over the weekend, I ran a talk where I discussed the physics that goes into building a simulator like this, as well as then how to actually turn that knowledge of the physics into Python code that you can write and run to generate these kind of images. And actually, as a spin-off, if anyone is interested, I developed this as a sort of very small Python script that you can access online for free. The full telescope simulator, which is well documented and actually includes a 1-hour talk in case you haven't heard enough of my voice tonight. There's also a 1-hour talk on this available online. And the third aspect we ran during the EIYC was EIYC projects. So this was an attempt to kind of replicate as best we could IAYC projects that we run during the camp. And these were sort of long-term run that participants completed in their free time, where they had regular drop-in sessions with their leader to help guide the participants through the project. And at the end of the camp, we had a sort of a poster symposium like you might do at a research conference. And this is just one example here of a poster we had submitted where one of the participants used some Python packages to try and to successfully simulate protoplanetary disks and their sort of warped shape, which people are starting to simulate these days to try and get a better understanding of planet formation. So what did we learn from taking an in-person camp into an online format? Well, one thing we learned was that online events are significantly less well attended than their in-person counterparts. And we just found it was difficult to sort of schedule these events into people's normal lives. People were still going about their daily lives and then trying to connect in when they could. It's just not the same as obviously being in a camp house somewhere in the middle of nowhere for 3 weeks where the camp is their sole focus. So what we told ourselves at the time, what we would like to do if we ever had to do this again, and of course we have to now, is aim for a set of more limited, higher impact events. And so that we can get better attendance, it's less frequent, but also so the organizers can sort of maximize the effort on a couple of events rather than spreading themselves thin trying to organize many less well-attended events. So as I mentioned, we're going virtual again this year, and we're taking the lessons from last year and focusing on 2 high impact events. The first of which is a online seminar series and a hackathon. I'll tell you about those now. So the seminar series, we're starting a series of bi-weekly talks starting on the 10th of June, 2021. And we have a wide variety of topics to be covered. You can read a few here: exoplanets, binary stars, instrumentation, which I believe is me, cosmology, neutrino astrophysics, art, culture, sustainable development. And these are pitched at a kind of high school science level, and they're also free to attend and open to the general public. And they have a sign-up deadline of the 31st of May. So, and I'll give you the link on where you can sign up for this in a minute. Of course, you know, it'd be great to see some of you there. And the second event we're running is the hackathon. between 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. through the 17th to 18th of July. I have been told that sleep is going to be allowed in between these two times, which is good. And what we're going to do during this is participants are going to work on a project in a small group, developing it, a project of their choice with the guidance of the leader team. So sort of a very condensed IAYC project. And this is targeted at our usual demographic of 16 to 24-year-olds, open to anyone to apply. And again, with the sign-up deadline, the 20th of June, 2021. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, or you know someone who would be interested, I would encourage you to sign up or, scrolling ahead, sign up or pass on the link, which is IAYC.org/eIAYC. And as I said, please do share this with anyone who might be interested. And sort of the last few slides I want to leave you with, I hope you'll sort of indulge me in a little bit of a pitch of how can you help. The first and most helpful thing you can do is to spread the word, tell anyone who may be interested about what we do, both the upcoming online events we have and hopefully the in-person IAYC 2022 that we're planning. So the best way to keep up to date with what we're doing is to follow us on social media or check our webpage. So we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and of course our website. And the second way you can help is actually by, if you are able to, offering a donation. So as I said, a major place where donations go is towards the grant program. And this really helps us reach more people who wouldn't be able to afford the camp otherwise, as well as helping us to purchase new equipment, such as more or bigger telescopes to improve the experience. So you can do that online at IAYC.org/support, or you can get in touch with me at daniel@IAYC.org to discuss a donation of any form. And finally, I'd also like to say that we are starting to branch into company sponsorships. If you know anyone who might be interested, again, please do get in touch with me, and I'd be very happy to discuss any kind of ideas. So that's it. I won't read these two quotes for you. I'll just leave them up on the screen. But thank you for listening, and that's everything I had. And happy to take any questions or chat about anything.
Great. Well, Dan, thank you very much for that. That was fantastic. I mean, I was just amazed at the amount of analysis that you had there on the camps.
Thank you.
I'll throw it open to, so if everyone, if you'd like to unmute yourselves and ask some questions, I'd like to sort of kick the ball rolling, Dan, with just asking you on, you've seen it from both sides, I understand. You went to the first one in 2012, and then you got involved in the organization. Bearing in mind, you're talking about quite a large number of people attending those camps. How is it managed? How do you manage to sort of control things? Because my experience was going to sort of 3 camps. The first camp was for 40 people. The second one was over 100, and already you noticed that it became a lot more difficult to manage. And then the third one in Italy, you definitely noticed some signs of sort of fraying at the edges in being able to sort of maintain, cohesion. So I'd be really interested in your comments on that. And the other thing was really on the funding. Clearly, when I went, there was significant funding from sort of local businesses in Germany, and the German government, I think, must have given a substantial grant towards it. I'd be interested in sort of finding out how that is managed these days, and what your main sources are for for funding it.
Yeah. So the first question of how do we manage that many participants is with some difficulty, is the sort of short answer. So what we have on the team is we have typically around 10 leaders 10 organizers, and we organized the camp from start to finish, from picking the camp house, selecting the participants, and then running the actual camp itself. And we have the sort of 8 working group leaders who, as I said, run a working group each. And then there's 1 NAP leader who doesn't run a working group, but organizes the NAP activities, but also supports what we call the general, who is kind of in charge of making sure everything flows smoothly during the camp. So we have sort of 2 people more or less working full time on solving any issues that come up, as well as each leader team. You know, each working group of 8 participants is directly linked to a leader. So it's kind of a small, you get a sort of small community within the camp as well, that all participants feel connected to someone on the team who can get something done. But it's kind of through experience. As I said, we've had 53 camps at this point. We find that around 10 leaders with 65 participants is kind of the magic ratio, that it's as large as we can go while still maintaining some sort of community cohesion, that you do have the opportunity to talk to more or less everyone at the camp. But of course, you know, there are more than enough people to go and talk to if you want to meet new people during the camp. Yeah, so we do our best to manage it, is the sort of simple answer. But in terms of the funding, to your second question, so when the problem is, a lot of the time, funding from organizations or states is contingent on the activity happening in their country. So when we are in Germany, we are able sometimes to get funding from sources within the German government. And when we were in the UK, we were given a small sponsorship from the Royal Astronomical Society, but that's typically sort of very fleeting, that we have to arrange every year. And typically that money goes into helping to subsidize the participation fee. But it's obviously nowhere near enough to fund the camp itself.
Yeah, okay, well, thanks for that. I just wondered, I noticed that you mentioned Rob McNaught, Paul, who's here somewhere, used to work with Rob.
Oh yeah.
Did you know he was at a astronomical youth camp?
No, he kept that very quiet. I wish I had known that, actually. I attended the second one in 1970, which you were at, Andrew. That was very good. I don't think Rob was at that one, so he must have been at a later camp, I guess. One question I have is, what is the oversubscription rate at the moment? I mean, how many people apply and unfortunately are unable to attend simply because you have too many applicants?
Yeah, so we've been very lucky in recent years. Well, lucky on our side of the organizers, unlucky on the participant side in recent years. The number of applicants we've got has been climbing quite significantly year on year. So for the most recent camp, obviously most recent in-person camp we were able to have in 2019, the subscription factor was around 2.5 times. So we had 2.5 times more participants than we could accept. But that's really changed in the last 5 or 6 years. 5 or 6 years ago, we were just about managing to fill the camp with the number of applications we've got, but we've really expanded recently. But that brings with it a whole sort of, it's great that we're getting so many more people interested, but it's kind of a double-edged sword that now we have to work a lot harder to come up with a system to actually select participants to come to the camp. So that's been a challenge in recent years that we've had.
And have you thought about contacting the International Astronomical Union, which has a sort of outreach office, I think, based in South Africa at the moment? I imagine the kind of experience that your organization's had over the last 53 years would be terribly useful to other groups organizing or wanting to organize similar sorts of events in different countries, perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so this is something that Hannah, who I believe Andrew knows, who was originally supposed to give this talk actually quite a while back. So this is something that Hannah's really been pushing in the team to get out there and talk to other organizations and give more community talks to sort of spread the knowledge of what we're doing. So I believe she has actually organized something. I think the IAU is, if I remember right, donating some small telescopes as prizes for the hackathon we're running this summer. So she's in touch with someone in the IAU in some way. But yeah, it's definitely something we should explore. We're happy to, share our knowledge in any way we can, or gain knowledge of how we can improve our camp in the future as well.
I think you've probably got to the stage where you can franchise the whole thing.
Potentially, yes. We like to keep it a sort of small in-person experience, but yes, I can see franchise camps running around the world. Sort of one in America and one somewhere else around the world.
So I mean, currently it's a Europe-focused camp, I guess, which is what it was for the first 3 camps as well. Is that a fair comment?
I think it's not an intentional European focus. I think it's a fair comment to say we are European focused, but I don't think it's intentional. It's just the fact, as I said, Europeans advertise to more Europeans who find it cheaper to travel to the camp because it's in Europe and so on. And so the vast majority of our organizing team is European, and all our equipment, all the telescopes are stored in Europe as well. And so hosting a camp outside of Europe is much more of a logistic nightmare, because we usually like to have someone who lives relatively local to the camp house so that they can communicate with the camp house beforehand and visit to make sure it's sort of suitable for what we need. So also we have quite specific sets of requirements for any places that we rent. But yeah, it's gonna, I can't see the IAYC moving outside of Europe for camp itself, but we're hoping to attract more participants from other parts of the world.
Dan, on the chat, that's a couple of things have come up from Andy Charalambos, who it's a shame he's not here in person, because his career has been in instrumentation as well. I'm sure you have a chat about. He was asking, well, the first question was the language that was used in the camps. What is that? Is it predominantly English, or would there be German and French as well used, or what's the general rule?
Yes, that's something I probably should have mentioned as well, that you do have to be sort of conversational English level speaking to attend the camp. So everything is run in English during the camp, which is great for people like me that unfortunately only speak English. I am working on my German, but I'm not quite conversational level. But yeah, so typically you have to be sort of conversational level English to attend the camp. All our events are run in English, all our media is in English. But of course, you do find during the camp that people of the same nationality cluster together and start speaking Spanish or German with each other. But that's another aspect of the camp I didn't mention, is that it's a great opportunity. People who non-native English speakers find that spending 3 weeks speaking solely English helps a lot with their language learning. And of course, I find going to hang around with native German speakers helps me with trying to learn German. So it's kind of this exchange of languages we have as well. But yes, it is English is the sort of official language of the camp, if you will.
Yeah, I certainly remember one bit of German. Heinrich macht die Kneipe auf. But
yes.
There you go.
We have a similar kind of German still at the camp these days as well.
Yeah. Andy's asked another one. He's commented that the seminar series page shows general areas which will be covered, but not much detail of what was within these areas. Is there some way of finding out more about the seminar's content?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So yes, the best way to find out is to sign up, and then we will send you an email once we have all the titles and abstracts finalized. It's more just a matter of that we haven't managed to get abstracts from everyone yet for the series. But yes, if you sign up, you will get an email as soon as that information is ready. But we'll definitely be having talks on those sort of general themes. I can tell you the instrumentation talk will probably be about instrumentation for optical interferometers. So there's one.
Right. Right. The one other question I had was, well, comment really was interested to see that food is a key feature. I'm not quite sure what it is with astronomers and food, but it was interesting in that when I contacted some of the old participants at the camps, the comments in each case were on food. And I just wondered if at this point, Dan, I could briefly carry on with my sort of presentation on the second and third camps, in case anyone, that is, if anyone's interested. Otherwise, I'll leave it. Okay. Where we got to was the end of the first camp. So going on to see if I can get this to work. Seems to have frozen. Oh, here we go. This was some pictures of some of the equipment that we had available at the camp. Some sort of interesting looking telescopes there. I'm not quite sure quite what they were. And I think it was at the second camp that in 1970. That was again held at the same place, the gliding club. But as you can see, this time the tents were, I think they were quite a bit larger, and they were in a circle. And we didn't have the motorbike to wake us up in the morning. So that was a relief. In the British contingent, there were two school friends I persuaded to come on the trip. One was Paul Cass, who you all know, and Colin Kropat, pictured here, was the other one. He sadly died earlier this month, because I was hoping he would be coming along this evening. But he recorded an anecdote about the camp for me for my 70th birthday, which was just in February this year. And I will try and play it for you. You'll have to crank up your sound though, because I think the volume's not that brilliant. But anyway, I'll give it a whirl. Let's see if it works.
One memory I do have from the time with Andrew is when we went to the astronomical camp in 1970. We were staying in tents, must have been ex-army tents, had no ground sheets. Every morning you wake up covered in bugs and crawl from the grass. We used to go and watch stars at night, see if we could see shooting stars, point our cameras up on the sky, looking for them. I remember one day we were eating ex-army rations, and boy were they bad. I was surprised the German army actually managed to do anything. Anyway, enjoy your day. Catch you soon. Bye.
So yeah, wonderful chap who'll be missed greatly. So that was this was another picture from the second camp. You can see here, this is probably one of the British contingents from the umbrella. I suspect it was probably Paul's actually. And once again, the campfires and communal singing, which I gather from Dan is still a key part of the NAP activities. That was greatly encouraged. I don't know if I mentioned the beginning, but you know, we at the first camp, we were asked to sing you know, British songs, and you know, I couldn't think of anything. You know, fortunately, we had a couple of people who knew the words of Ilkley More Bar Tat, so we're able to get away with it. So let's push on to the third camp. About this time, 50 years ago, I was corresponding with Paolo Pizzinato, who you see here on this chap here, and this picture above Florence. Paolo and Dr. Luigi Baldinelli organized the third camp in Bologna, and the accommodation this time was much more luxurious. We were in the university in proper beds, and the food was Italian. Tor Norotranders, who you see here, I contacted him recently about the camp, and his first comment was spaghetti and meatballs. So clearly food, you see, food is the key issue for astronomers. Anyway, we had trips up to we had use of an observatory of Bologna at Tizzano, and there was a lunar eclipse that took place during the camp. So it was quite exciting, and the weather was decent as well, which was not the case in Germany, where the weather was very very dodgy. Sadly, Paolo was killed a few years later. He was in a motorcycle accident when he was crossing the Sahara Desert, and they renamed the observatory the Osservatorio Paolo Pizzinato, Bologna. So, just talking a little bit about Tor Norotranders, he's a very likable chap, and I did try and contact him for tonight's meeting. He said he would normally have loved to have come along, but he was launching a book tomorrow called Karma Corona, which was, of course, about the pandemic. He's a very successful popular science author and broadcaster in Denmark. And I would really recommend a book he wrote called The User Illusion, which is about consciousness. If any of you had an interest in that, very well worth looking it up on Amazon or whatever. It's a great read and fantastic information in it. So here, on this slide, we've got Peter Gill, who I thought was going to be here tonight, but I guess he couldn't make it. He currently, he still works in the astronomy field. He works for Astronomy Now, the magazine, and he does a number of, he also runs the Eastbourne Astronomical Society. I sort of kept in touch with him. In fact, after the trip, I'll just show you the last slide, but that was to a radio observatory in Tuscany. But afterwards, I went traveling with Peter, and we had a memorable night once. We decided to go to the hills, the Apennines above Florence, to try and see the Perseids. We just stayed out all night, and unfortunately, I'd just taken a very light jacket with me, and of course, it got very, very cold. And there were no buses back, so we were just stuck there until 6 o'clock in the morning when the next bus left for Florence. And I've never been so happy to see a place in my life, I don't think, as when we went back. So anyway, that's I'll stop sharing that now, but I just wanted to give you that sort of a little brief sort of snapshot of what it was like. And well, I'd love to hear from you what any of your thoughts on the camps. Paul, do you have any more comments?
Well, I went to the Renfeld camp, and I do remember during a thunderstorm that the place where we were was struck 4 times by lightning in about 1 minute, you know. So the idea that lightning never strikes the same place twice is absolutely rubbish.
Yeah.
It was a great experience. I very much enjoyed it, and it was lovely to be with lots of people from different countries. And I think it was at that camp that I became a sort of convinced European.
Exactly. Well, Shazad has just made a comment which I thoroughly agree with. I hope everyone's seen it. He said, great talk, and he wishes he was 16 to 24 again. So, Daniel, I'd really like to thank you again for a fantastic talk. It was everything I was hoping for in telling me what the IAYC is doing now. And I hope we'll keep in touch. And I'd love to know if you find any other people who are at the first 3 camps. It would be fascinating to find out what they're up to. So anyway, and good luck. Thank you very much for your talk as well about your current work. It was really a fantastic bonus for us. And maybe you can come back again and talk to us about interferometry.
Yes, I was going to say it is a whole nother talk, which I have many other talks written about that as well.
Great. So Dan, many thanks, and thank you all, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you next month when we're going to be hearing about galactic superwave theory. So anyway, many thanks to you all, and we'll see you next month. Okay.
Cheers. Thank you.
Bye for now.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
See you.
Bye.